The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Windsor Castle. Queen Camilla walked through the grand hallways with purpose, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors. She had been queen consort for several years now, but sometimes she still felt the weight of the crown and the expectations that came with it. Today was different. Today something inside her felt restless. Perhaps it was the stress of the upcoming state dinner, or maybe it was the endless meetings about protocol and tradition. Whatever it was, Camilla needed a moment to herself. She decided to take a walk through the palace garden, something she rarely did alone. As she approached the east gate, she noticed a young guard standing at attention. His uniform was immaculate, every button polished to perfection. His face was stern, focused straight ahead, just as royal guards were trained to be. The guard's name was James Morrison. He was 28 years old and had served in the Royal Guard for 5 years. He came from a humble background in Manchester. His father had been a factory worker, and his mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. Joining the Royal Guard was the proudest moment of his life. James took his duty seriously. Every morning he woke up at 5 o'clock sharp. He exercised, polished his uniform, and reviewed the day's security protocols. He believed in service, in honor, and in doing his job with dignity. The royal family deserved protection, and he was determined to provide it. Camilla stopped a few feet away from James. She studied him for a moment. There was something in his posture that spoke of dedication. She had seen hundreds of guards during her time at the palace, but something about this young man caught her attention. Without warning, she spoke. Her voice was clear and carried the authority of her position. The words that came out of her mouth would change everything. "Guard," she said firmly, "I want you to kneel before me." James's eyes flickered for just a second. His training told him to remain still, to not react to any distraction. But this was not a distraction. This was a direct command from the queen consort herself. Time seemed to slow down. The birds stopped singing. The wind held its breath. James felt his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that every decision he made in the next few seconds would define not just this moment, but possibly his entire career. In the Royal Guard, there were rules. Strict rules. Guards were not supposed to abandon their posts. They were trained to stand firm no matter what happened around them. They were living symbols of stability and strength. To kneel would mean breaking formation. It would mean putting personal obedience above duty. But on the other hand, this was the queen consort. She was royalty. She was part of the very institution he had sworn to serve and protect. How could he refuse a direct order from someone so high in the royal hierarchy? James's mind raced through his training. He remembered the words of his commanding officer during his first week at Windsor. The officer had been an old veteran with gray hair and a scar above his left eye. He had looked at the new recruits with eyes that had seen decades of service. "You will face moments of confusion," the officer had said. "You will face situations where the right choice is not clear. In those moments, remember why you are here. You are not here to serve individuals. You are here to serve the crown, the institution, the idea of what this monarchy represents." Those words echoed in James's head now. He glanced at Camilla, who stood waiting with an expression that was hard to read. Was she testing him? Was this some kind of evaluation that he did not know about? Several other palace staff members had begun to notice what was happening. A gardener working near the fountain paused and looked over. 2 maids carrying linen slowed their pace as they passed by. Word would spread quickly if this became a scene. James felt the weight of their stares. He felt the pressure building inside him. This was not just about following an order. This was about understanding what that order meant, where it came from, and what it would cost him to obey or refuse. Camilla took a small step closer. Her face remained calm, but there was something in her eyes. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was something deeper. She wanted to see what this young guard would do. She wanted to understand the men and women who stood watch over her family every day. Behind Camilla, through the archway, James could see other guards at their posts. They had not heard the command. They continued their duties, unaware of the silent drama unfolding just yards away from them. Soon, though, they would know. Everyone would know. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. James knew he had to make a choice. Whatever he decided, there would be consequences. His future, his reputation, his very understanding of duty and honor hung in the balance. And then, slowly, deliberately, James began to move. But James did not kneel. Instead, he straightened his back even more, if that was possible. His eyes remained fixed on the horizon, looking past Camilla as protocol demanded. When he spoke, his voice was respectful but firm. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "with all due respect, I cannot abandon my post. My duty is to stand guard here, and that is what I must do." The words hung in the air like smoke. The gardener dropped his pruning shears. The maid stopped walking entirely. Even the clouds seemed to freeze in place. Nobody refused a direct command from royalty. It simply was not done. Camilla's expression changed. For a moment, James thought he saw anger flash across her face. His heart sank. He had just refused the queen consort. His career was over. He would be dismissed, humiliated, maybe even charged with insubordination. But then something unexpected happened. Camilla's lips curved into a small smile. It was not a mocking smile or a cruel smile. It was genuine, almost warm. She took a step back and looked at James with what could only be described as approval. "You are quite right, Guard Morrison," she said, using his name for the first time. "Your duty is to your post, not to me personally. I wanted to see if you understood that. Too many people forget the difference between loyalty to a person and loyalty to an institution." James felt relief wash over him, but he kept his composure. He allowed himself the smallest nod of acknowledgement. Camilla continued to stand there, studying him with new interest. She had spent years surrounded by people who agreed with everything she said, who bent over backward to please her. This young guard had done something different. "Tell me, Guard Morrison," Camilla said, "how long have you served here?" "5 years, Your Majesty. And in those 5 years, have you ever left your post when you were not supposed to?" "Never, Your Majesty." Camilla nodded slowly. She thought about her own journey to this position. She had not been born into royalty. She had married into it later in life, and the transition had been far from smooth. The public had been harsh. The media had been cruel. She had made mistakes along the way, said things she regretted, done things differently than protocol demanded. But through it all, she had learned something important. She had learned that the monarchy was bigger than any one person. It was a system, a tradition, a set of values that had survived for centuries because people like James understood their role in protecting it. "Your commanding officer must be very proud of you," Camilla said. "What is his name?" "Colonel Harrison, Your Majesty." Yes, Colonel Harrison. A good man. I shall make sure he knows about this conversation." James felt a new wave of anxiety. Was she going to report him? Would Colonel Harrison see his refusal as disrespectful? Military discipline could be harsh, even when you thought you had done the right thing. By now, several other guards had noticed that the Queen Consort was spending an unusual amount of time at the East Gate. 2 of them began walking over, concerned that something might be wrong. Camilla waved them off with a gentle hand gesture. "Everything is fine," she called out to them. "I am just having a pleasant conversation with Guard Morrison here." The other guards hesitated but then returned to their positions. They would definitely be talking about this later. The palace grapevine worked faster than any internet connection. By evening, everyone from the kitchen staff to the senior advisors would know about this strange encounter. Camilla turned her attention back to James. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set. He was still worried, still uncertain about what would happen next. She decided to put him at ease. "You did the right thing today, Guard Morrison. Never doubt that. The monarchy needs people who understand duty, who know when to obey and when to stand firm. You showed me today that you are one of those people." "Thank you, Your Majesty," James replied, his voice steady despite the emotion swirling inside him. Camilla gave him one last smile before turning to walk away. As she moved back toward the palace, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt hope. Hope that the institution she had become part of was in good hands. Hope that there were still people who understood what true service meant. James remained at his post, but his mind was racing. What had just happened? Had he really refused the Queen Consort and somehow come out of it okay? It seemed impossible. Yet here he was, still standing, still on duty, still a member of the Royal Guard. The rest of his shift passed in a blur. Other guards shot him curious glances as they rotated positions. Nobody said anything directly to him, but he could feel their questions hanging in the air. "What did she say to you? What did you say to her? Are you in trouble?" When his shift finally ended, James walked to the guard station to sign out. Colonel Harrison was waiting for him there. The colonel was a tall man with silver hair and a military bearing that commanded respect. His face was unreadable. "Morrison," he said simply. "My office." Now James followed the colonel down the narrow corridor to his office. His heart was pounding again. This was it. This was where he would learn his fate. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like thunder in James's ears. Colonel Harrison sat down behind his desk and gestured for James to take a seat. The office was small but tidy, filled with military certificates and photographs from various royal events. James sat down, his back straight, his hands resting on his knees. The colonel looked at him for a long moment without speaking. James forced himself to meet his gaze, even though every instinct told him to look away. Finally, Colonel Harrison leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. "I received a phone call this afternoon," the colonel began. "From the Queen Consort's private secretary. He told me about your encounter at the East Gate." James swallowed hard. Here it comes, he thought. This is where I get dismissed. This is where they tell me I disrespected royalty and there are consequences for that. "Sir, I can explain," James started, but Colonel Harrison held up his hand. "No need for explanations, Morrison." Her Majesty was quite clear about what happened. She said you demonstrated exactly the kind of integrity and understanding of duty that this institution needs. She specifically asked me to commend you. James blinked in surprise. Had he heard that correctly? Commend him, not discipline him? The colonel allowed himself a small smile. "It is not often that one of my guards impresses a member of the royal family so much that they call personally to praise them. You should be proud of yourself, Morrison. You made the right call in a difficult situation." "Thank you, sir," James managed to say, relief flooding through him. Colonel Harrison stood up and walked around his desk. He placed a hand on James's shoulder. "I trained you to understand that your duty is to the crown as an institution, not to any individual person. Today, you proved that you learned that lesson. Well done." As James left the colonel's office, he felt like he was walking on air. The weight that had been pressing on his chest all afternoon had lifted. He had done the right thing and it had been recognized. It was a good feeling, one that reminded him why he had joined the Royal Guard in the first place. But the story was far from over. Word of the incident spread through the palace like wildfire. By the next morning, everyone knew about it. The kitchen staff whispered about it while preparing breakfast. The housekeepers discussed it while making beds. The senior advisors debated its meaning over their morning tea. Some people thought it was a wonderful thing. They saw it as proof that the royal family respected true dedication and proper protocol. Others thought it was strange. Why would the Queen Consort test a guard like that? What was she trying to prove? The media eventually got wind of the story. A reporter for a London newspaper had a friend who worked in the palace laundry service. The friend told the reporter about the unusual encounter. Within days, the story appeared in several newspapers under headlines like, "Palace Guard Refuses Royal Order and Guard Stands His Ground." Most of the articles were positive. They praised James for understanding his duty and sticking to it. They praised Camilla for testing the guard and then recognizing his integrity. But not everyone saw it that way. Some commentators questioned whether it was appropriate for a member of the royal family to test their staff like that. Others argued that guards should be flexible enough to respond to any request from royalty. The debate raged on television talk shows and internet forums for several days. James tried his best to ignore all of it. He continued to show up for his shifts, stand his post, and do his job. But it was hard to pretend nothing had changed. Other guards looked at him differently now. Some with admiration, some with envy, a few with suspicion. One afternoon, about a week after the incident, James was approached by Thomas Fletcher, another guard who had served at the palace for nearly 10 years. Thomas was known for being quiet and keeping to himself, but he had always been friendly to James. "You handled that situation well," Thomas said as they walked through the palace corridors during their break. "Better than I would have, probably." James shrugged. "I just did what I thought was right. I followed my training." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "That is the thing, though, is it not? Training can only prepare you so much. In the moment, you have to trust your own judgment. That is what makes a good guard a great guard." They walked in silence for a moment. Then Thomas spoke again, his voice lower now. "I heard there might be changes coming. New protocols, new training programs. The higher-ups want to make sure all the guards understand what you understood. That loyalty is to the institution, not to individuals. James was surprised. Really, because of what happened with me? Thomas smiled slightly. Your situation brought something to light. It made people think about what we are really here for. That is never a bad thing. Meanwhile, Camilla herself had been thinking about the encounter. She discussed it with King Charles during one of their private dinners. Charles listened carefully as she described what had happened, how she had tested the young guard and how he had responded. Charles nodded approvingly. You did well, he said. It is important to know that the people protecting us understand their true purpose. Too often, loyalty becomes personal rather than institutional. That guard showed he knows the difference, Camilla smiled. I think this young man has a bright future ahead of him. Perhaps we should keep an eye on his career. Indeed, Charles agreed. People like him are rare. They should be valued and promoted. As days turned into weeks, the immediate attention faded. The newspapers moved on to other stories. The palace staff found new things to gossip about. But the impact of that moment at the East Gate continued to ripple outward in ways that nobody could have predicted. 3 months after the incident at the East Gate, James received news that would change his life once again. Colonel Harrison called him into his office on a bright spring morning. This time James walked in with confidence rather than anxiety. He had learned that meetings with the colonel were not always about problems. Morrison, the colonel said with a serious expression, I have been reviewing your record. Your performance over the past 5 years has been exemplary. Your conduct 3 months ago demonstrated a level of judgment and integrity that we rarely see. James listened carefully, unsure where this was going. I am promoting you to senior guard, Colonel Harrison continued. You will be responsible for training new recruits and helping them understand what it truly means to serve the crown. Your experience will be invaluable in shaping the next generation of royal guards, and James felt a surge of pride and gratitude. Sir, I do not know what to say. Thank you. I will not let you down, the colonel smiled. I know you will not. This promotion comes with the full support of the royal household. Her Majesty the Queen Consort specifically mentioned that she believed you would excel in a training role. James began his new duties the following week. He found himself standing in front of a group of 20 young recruits, all of them eager to prove themselves worthy of serving the royal family. They looked at him with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Many of them had heard the story of his encounter with Queen Camilla. Good morning, James began. My name is Senior Guard Morrison, and I will be responsible for part of your training over the next several weeks. I want to start by talking about something that many people misunderstand about this job. The recruits leaned forward, paying close attention. You are not here to serve individuals, James continued. You are here to serve the crown as an institution. That means understanding that your loyalty is to something bigger than any one person. Even if that person is a king or queen, your duty is to protect and uphold the monarchy itself, the traditions and values it represents. One recruit raised his hand. A young man with red hair and freckles. His name tag read Davies. Sir, Davies said, how do we know when to follow orders from a royal and when to follow our duty to our post? James smiled. It was a good question, an intelligent question. That is exactly the kind of thing you need to think about. The answer is not always simple. But I can tell you this. Your primary duty is always to your assigned task. If you are told to guard a gate, you guard that gate. If you are told to patrol a corridor, you patrol that corridor. Personal requests, even from royalty, do not override your core responsibilities. Another recruit, a young woman named Chen, raised her hand. But sir, what if disobeying causes problems? What if it makes someone angry? James thought about his own experience at the East Gate. Then you have to trust that doing the right thing will ultimately be recognized and respected. I will not lie to you. There may be moments when you face criticism for standing your ground. But if you are true to your duty, if you act with integrity, you will find that the people who truly matter will understand and support you. The training sessions continued over the following weeks. James shared stories from his own experience, taught them about protocol and tradition, and helped them understand the weight of the responsibility they were taking on. He found that he enjoyed teaching, enjoyed seeing the moment when a concept clicked in a recruit's mind. One evening, as he was leaving the training grounds, James ran into Thomas Fletcher again. Thomas had recently been assigned to oversee security for a series of state dinners, and he looked tired. "Congratulations on the promotion," Thomas said. "I heard you are doing excellent work with the new recruits, thank you." "It is challenging but rewarding. How are the state dinners going?" Thomas laughed, exhausting, but I cannot complain. It is an honor to be trusted with such important events. They walked together toward the guard quarters, discussing the challenges and rewards of their work. James realized how much he had grown since joining the Royal Guard. He had started as a nervous young man from Manchester, who barely knew how to polish his uniform properly. Now he was a senior guard responsible for shaping the next generation. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla had not forgotten about James. She occasionally asked Colonel Harrison about his progress in his new role. The colonel always had positive things to report. James was proving to be an excellent instructor, patient but demanding, fair but firm. During one of her regular walks through the palace grounds, Camilla made a point of passing by the training area. She watched from a distance as James led a group of recruits through a drill. She could see the respect the young guards had for him, the way they listened when he spoke. Her private secretary, a woman named Margaret, who had worked for the royal family for 20 years, noticed where Camilla was looking. "He has done well, has he not?" Margaret commented quietly. "Yes," Camilla replied. "He understood something that day that many people never grasp. He understood that true loyalty is about serving principles, not pleasing people. That is a rare quality." As spring turned into summer, James settled into his role as a senior guard and trainer. His days were filled with purpose and meaning. He worked with new recruits, supervised security details, and continued to stand his own shifts when needed. He had found his place within the institution he served. One afternoon, James received an unexpected message. He was requested to attend a small ceremony in one of the palace's private rooms. When he arrived, he found Colonel Harrison, several senior palace officials, and, to his surprise, Queen Camilla herself. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. James was presented with a commendation for exemplary service, signed by both King Charles and Queen Camilla. As Camilla handed him the framed certificate, she spoke quietly so only he could hear. "Thank you for reminding all of us what true duty looks like, Guard Morrison. The monarchy is stronger because of people like you." James felt a lump in his throat as he accepted the commendation. It was one of the proudest moments of his life, not because of the recognition itself, but because of what it represented. He had stayed true to his principles, and it had mattered. The months following the commendation ceremony brought new challenges for James. Being a senior guard was more complicated than he had expected. It was not just about training recruits or standing watch. It was about making difficult decisions, mediating conflicts, and setting an example every single day. One particularly difficult situation arose with a young recruit named Miller. Miller was talented and dedicated, but he had a tendency to question everything. He challenged protocols, argued with instructors, and seemed to think the rules did not fully apply to him. During a training session, Miller openly questioned why guards could not use their phones while on duty. "Sir, with all respect," he said to James, "we live in a modern world. Surely we can find a balance between tradition and practicality." James paused before responding. He understood where Miller was coming from. The young guard was not being disrespectful. He was genuinely trying to understand the reasoning behind the rules. But James also knew that some traditions existed for good reasons. "Miller, I understand your question, but think about what our job really is. When you are on duty, you are representing something bigger than yourself. People who visit the palace, tourists who take photographs, even the royal family themselves. They need to see guards who are completely focused on their duty. A guard looking at his phone sends the wrong message. It suggests distraction, lack of focus, maybe even lack of respect for the position." Miller nodded slowly, but James could see he was not entirely convinced. After the training session, James pulled Miller aside for a private conversation. They walked through one of the palace gardens, away from the other recruits. "I want you to understand something," James said. "I was like you once. I questioned things. I wondered why we did things in certain ways. But I learned that tradition is not just about doing things because we have always done them. It is about understanding what those traditions represent." Miller looked at him with interest. "What do they represent?" "Stability, continuity, reliability, When people see a royal guard standing perfectly still, completely focused, they see someone they can depend on. In a world that changes constantly, that never stops moving, we represent something solid and unchanging. That matters more than you might think. Over the following weeks, James watched Miller carefully. The young guard seemed to take his words to heart. His attitude improved. He still asked questions, but now they were thoughtful questions aimed at understanding rather than challenging. James felt proud of that progress. Not all challenges were about individual guards. Sometimes they were about the system itself. One day, Colonel Harrison called a meeting of all senior guards. The topic was modernizing palace security while maintaining traditional appearances. It was a delicate balance. "Gentlemen and ladies," Colonel Harrison began, "we face a challenge. The world is changing rapidly. Security threats are evolving. We need to adapt our methods while preserving the image and traditions that make the Royal Guard unique. I want to hear your thoughts." The discussion that followed was intense. Some senior guards argued for maintaining everything exactly as it had always been. Others pushed for significant changes. James listened to both sides, thinking carefully about what he believed was right. When it was his turn to speak, James chose his words carefully. "I think we need to separate what is essential from what is merely customary. The essence of what we do, standing watch, protecting the royal family, representing stability, that should never change. But the methods we use to do those things can evolve. We can have modern security technology hidden behind traditional uniforms. We can update our training while maintaining ceremonial practices." Several other senior guards nodded in agreement. Colonel Harrison looked pleased. "Morrison makes a good point. We are not asking anyone to abandon tradition. We are asking them to think about how tradition and progress can work together." That meeting marked the beginning of several reforms in the Royal Guard. Changes were implemented gradually, carefully, with respect for tradition but an eye toward the future. James found himself at the center of these efforts, helping to design training programs that taught both old values and new techniques. As autumn arrived, James received a letter from his mother back in Manchester. She wrote about how proud she and his late father would have been of what he had accomplished. She mentioned that their neighbors had seen articles about him in the newspapers. The boy from their working-class neighborhood had become someone important, someone respected. James read the letter several times. It reminded him of where he had come from, of the journey that had brought him here. He thought about his father working long hours in the factory, his mother scrubbing floors to pay the bills. They had sacrificed so much to give him opportunities they never had. His success was their success too. One evening, James was supervising a night shift when something unusual happened. A tourist, an elderly woman from Japan, had gotten separated from her tour group and was lost somewhere in the palace grounds. She did not speak much English, and she was becoming increasingly distressed. James found her sitting on a bench near the south garden, tears streaming down her face. He knew he should radio for someone from visitor services, but something made him stop and try to help directly. Using basic gestures and the few Japanese phrases he had learned from a fellow guard, he managed to calm her down. A young guard named Chen, the same recruit who had asked questions during training, happened to pass by. She spoke Japanese fluently. Between the three of them, they figured out where the woman's tour group had gone and arranged for her to be reunited with them. The elderly woman bowed deeply to both James and Chen, expressing her gratitude in rapid Japanese. Chen translated. "She says you have shown her true kindness. She says she will never forget this. She thought all guards were just statues, but you showed her they are real people with good hearts." After the woman left with her tour group, Chen turned to James with a smile. "Sir, what you did tonight, that was not in any training manual. But it felt right," James smiled back. "That is because being a good guard is not just about following rules, Chen. It is about understanding when compassion is more important than protocol. You helped me see that tonight. You did not hesitate to step in and translate. That was good judgment." These moments, big and small, shaped James's understanding of his role. He was not just a guard or a trainer. He was part of a living institution that served real people. The tourists who visited, the staff who worked there, the royal family who called it home, they all deserved guards who understood both tradition and humanity. As winter approached, James reflected on the year that had passed. It had started with a simple moment at the East Gate, a test he had not known he was taking. That moment had changed his life in ways he could never have imagined. But more importantly, it had changed how he understood his duty. He had learned that duty was not just about following orders. It was about understanding principles. It was about knowing when to stand firm and when to show compassion. It was about serving something bigger than yourself, while never forgetting that you were also serving real people with real needs. These lessons were now part of every training session he conducted, every piece of advice he gave to new recruits. He wanted them to understand what he had learned not through lectures but through example and experience. The best teachers, he had discovered, were the ones who continued to learn. 2 years had passed since that morning at the East Gate. James stood in the same spot now, but everything had changed. He was no longer the young guard uncertain about his place in the world. He had become someone who understood his purpose, who had found his calling in service to something greater than himself. The palace grounds looked beautiful in the early spring sunshine. Cherry blossoms were beginning to bloom in the gardens. Tourists gathered outside the gates, taking photographs and marveling at the grandeur of the historic building. Life at the palace continued as it had for centuries, a blend of tradition and daily routine. James was now head of the training division. Colonel Harrison had retired 6 months earlier, and before leaving he had personally recommended James for the promotion. It was a position of significant responsibility, overseeing not just individual training sessions, but the entire approach to preparing guards for their duties. On this particular morning, James was meeting with a delegation from other royal households across Europe. They wanted to learn about the training methods that had made Windsor's royal guard so respected. Representatives from Spain, Denmark, and Sweden sat in the conference room, listening intently as James explained his philosophy. The key is to teach guards that they serve the institution, not individuals, James explained. We train them to understand that loyalty to the crown means loyalty to what the crown represents: stability, tradition, service to the nation. This understanding allows them to make good decisions even in unexpected situations. A Danish officer raised his hand. But how do you balance that with the need to respect and protect the royal family members themselves? James smiled. It is not a contradiction. Protecting the institution and protecting individuals go hand in hand. The difference is in understanding priorities. A guard might have to make a choice between personal convenience for a royal and proper security protocol. In those moments, protocol must win. The royal family themselves understand and respect this. In fact, they depend on it. After the meeting, James walked through the training grounds where a new group of recruits was going through drills. He recognized some of the same challenges he had faced when he first started. The uncertainty, the desire to prove themselves, the struggle to understand what true duty meant. One recruit, a young woman named Sarah Bennett, approached him during a break. "Sir," she said respectfully, "may I ask you something?" "Of course, Bennett. What is on your mind?" "I heard the story about what happened between you and Queen Camilla. Is it true? Did you really refuse a direct order from her?" James nodded. "Yes, it is true. She asked me to kneel and leave my post. I explained that I could not abandon my duty. It turned out she was testing me, seeing if I understood what my real responsibility was. Were you scared when you refused?" "Terrified," James admitted with a slight smile. "I thought my career was over. But I knew I had to do what was right, regardless of the consequences. That is what duty means sometimes. Doing the right thing even when it is difficult, even when you are afraid." Sarah Bennett looked thoughtful. "Thank you, sir. That helps me understand." Later that afternoon, James received an unexpected visitor. Queen Camilla's private secretary informed him that Her Majesty requested a brief meeting. James felt a familiar flutter of nervousness. Even after all this time and all his experience, he met Camilla in one of the smaller sitting rooms, a comfortable space with large windows overlooking the gardens. She was having tea and invited him to sit down. This was highly unusual. Guards typically did not have casual tea with royalty. Guard Morrison, or should I say head of training Morrison, Camilla began with a warm smile. "I wanted to speak with you about something important." James sat carefully on the edge of his chair. "Your Majesty, how may I assist you? I have been watching your progress over these past 2 years. The changes you have made to the training program. The way you have influenced an entire generation of guards. You have done something remarkable. You have helped preserve tradition while also preparing the Royal Guard for modern challenges. Thank you, Your Majesty. I have tried to honor the lessons I learned, Both from my training and from you. Camilla nodded. That day at the East Gate I was testing you, but I was also testing myself. I wanted to know if I had truly become part of this institution, if I understood what it meant to be a member of the royal family. Your response taught me something important. It showed me that the people who serve the crown understand it better than those who wear it sometimes. James was not sure how to respond to such an honest admission from someone in Camilla's position. He chose his words carefully. Your Majesty, I think you understand the institution very well. Your test that day showed wisdom. You wanted to ensure that the people protecting your family truly knew their duty. Camilla looked out the window at the gardens. When I married into this family, I was an outsider. Many people questioned whether I belonged here. I questioned it myself sometimes. But over time, I have learned that being part of the monarchy is not about birth or blood. It is about understanding and upholding the values that the institution represents. You helped me see that more clearly. They spoke for nearly an hour, a conversation between two people who had both learned important lessons about duty, service, and the weight of responsibility. When James finally left the sitting room, he felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for his career success, but for the journey that had brought him understanding. That evening, James wrote a letter to his mother. He told her about his conversation with Queen Camilla, about the training program he was building, about the sense of purpose he felt every day. He thanked her for the values she had instilled in him from a young age: honesty, integrity, hard work, respect for others. Those values had guided him through the most important decision of his life. When he stood at that gate 2 years ago, uncertain whether to kneel or stand firm, it was his mother's voice he heard in his head. Do what is right even when it is hard. That simple lesson had shaped everything that followed. The story of James Morrison and Queen Camilla became part of palace legend. New recruits heard about it during their first week of training. Visitors occasionally asked guides about the guard who refused a royal order. The media had long moved on to other stories, but within the palace walls the incident remained significant. It became a teaching moment, a reminder that true loyalty was not about blind obedience. It was about understanding principles and having the courage to uphold them. It was about knowing when to say yes and when to say no, even to people in positions of great authority. Years would pass. James would eventually rise to become chief of palace security. He would train thousands of guards, each one learning the same fundamental lesson he had learned that morning at the East Gate. Some would face their own tests, their own moments of decision. And because of the foundation James had helped build, most would make the right choice. The monarchy would continue, as it had for centuries. Kings and queens would come and go. Guards would stand their posts year after year, generation after generation. The faces would change, but the principles would remain constant. Duty, honor, service, understanding that loyalty to the crown meant loyalty to something greater than any individual, and whenever someone asked about the secret to the Royal Guard's excellence, the answer would include the story of a young guard from Manchester who understood something that many people miss. He understood that true strength is not about power or authority. It is about knowing who you are, what you stand for, and having the courage to live by those values no matter what. That lesson, taught by example on a spring morning years ago, would echo through time. It would inspire other guards, other servants, other people who dedicated their lives to service. And in that way, one moment of clarity, one decision to stand firm when it would have been easier to kneel, would shape the character of an entire institution. James Morrison had not set out to be a hero or a legend. He had simply tried to do his job correctly. But sometimes doing the right thing in the right moment is exactly what creates a legacy. And his legacy would be guards who understood their duty, royalty who respected proper protocol, and an institution that continued to represent the best of tradition while adapting to the needs of each new generation. The palace stood as it always had, grand and imposing, a symbol of continuity in a changing world. Inside its walls, men and women went about their duties with dedication and pride. And at the East Gate, guards stood watch just as they had for centuries, protecting not just buildings and people, but ideals and traditions that defined a nation. The story that began with a simple question, a test of character at a palace gate, had become something much larger. It had become a reminder that in every generation, in every organization, in every life, there come moments when we must choose between what is easy and what is right. And the choice we make in those moments defines not just who we are, but who we will become.